Belly. Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about another topic that is very near and dear to my heart. This is something that is highly prevalent across all shelters across the country and the world. It's ringworm. Now, I feel when people hear that, it's a bit of a buzzword and people get kind of scared when they hear about ringworm. I feel like their minds start running away with them and they assume that this is kind of like a death sentence or something. And I often feel that when people in the shelter hear that an animal has ringworm, they feel like the worst thing has happened to this animal. Unfortunately, there are some shelters that do euthanize for this condition just because of how long treatment is and how time intensive it is. They usually will euthanize because they can't afford to devote that time to the treatment of the animal and they don't have the staff or the resources to do so. So if they can't find a partner to take them, then they will euthanize. However, there are a ton of shelters working every day to treat these animals, figure out a better process for them, and cut down treatment time. Ringworm is essentially a skin infection caused by a fungus, and it gets its name from the circular lesions that it creates on the skin that are red and flaky and itchy. Ringworm is also known as dermatophytosis, and there are about 40 different species of ringworm, but the main three that you usually see are trichophyton, microsporum, and epidermophyton. The most common ones we see in the shelter are trichophyton and then microsporum canis and microsporum gypsum. So the difference between those two is that microsporum canis is actually zoonotic, so it can be transferred between animals and humans. Microsporum gypsum is actually not zoonotic, so it can be transferred from animal to animal, but not between animals and humans. That all of them cause the same kind of symptoms, it's just a different species. When we look under the microscope, we can see differences in it, but they still cause the same lesions. So humans and animals contract ringworm by skin-to-skin contact with someone who is infected. The treatment, especially for animals, is extremely involved, which is why a lot of people are very wary to get involved with it, because it is kind of difficult to not contract it with an animal if you're not taking the right precautions. And then people worry about if they catch it, they have to go ahead and treat themselves or their animals out of pocket at their own cost, which I totally understand, and that's why we struggle so much in the shelter system to treat ringworm, but also find foster homes for them. Fostering is actually a better situation for them, but it is difficult to find people willing to put in the work and put in the time to treat them in their own home, especially with something that is contagious to both themselves and their animals, which I totally understand is concerning. I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of tips and tricks to see if you are interested in fostering and have the capability to do so. These things will significantly decrease your chances of contracting it to yourself or your personal animals. So I filmed a day in my life in the ringworm ward. Like I said, as the ICU technician, am responsible for treating and medicating and managing patients with contagious illnesses, and that would include ringworms. So in one day, I'm treating multiple different kinds of illnesses. So it's not just one full day just in the ringworm ward like it can be with parvo. It's just kind of like a full treatment time in one day that we do, so I will take you along with me for that. So there are a few ways that we go about diagnosing ringworm in animals. One of the first things we do is to shine something called a Woods lamp, which is basically a black light on the lesions. And what we're looking for there is basically this apple green glow on the hair follicles, and that will tell us that there is an active fungus on the skin and in the follicles. The Woods lamp is useful, but it's not 100% reliable just because other things can glow under the black light. So if you have flaky scabs, it's hard to know if that's actually ringworm scabbing or if it's just another kind of skin scab. So that's why we really focus on the hair follicle. But other things like medication and things like that can also show up with the same similar type of glow. So it's not really 100%, especially especially if you already have an animal that you're treating in the shelter that you think might have ringworm, but you've just given it medicine or given it a bath or something like that, like that's going to kind of hinder your results if you rely specifically on the Woods lamp. A lot of shelters are moving towards sending out lab samples to diagnose ringworm. So there are a couple labs where you will either brush the fur or actually pluck the hairs and send them off to a lab. The labs will often speciate for you so you can know what kind of ringworm you're dealing with. Treatment's usually the same, but it is helpful to know if you're dealing with the zoonotic form versus the non-zoonotic form, because that will help you move them through the shelter, and it will kind of give you a little bit more peace of mind to know that like you can't contract it if you're accidentally touching them. So in the shelter, after we have a positive diagnosis, those animals will be isolated into a separate ward, very similar to parvo, where they are in their own room with their own bedding and dishes and everything else. Staff has to wear usually full PPE when they go in there. The PPE is especially important for protecting ourselves from contracting it, and also protecting like our clothing from becoming fomites for other animals. Since it is a fungus, there are spores all around in their kennels and their bedding, and especially in their litter. So any kind of those spores can get on us, and then if we carry that around the shelter and we're just walking dogs and hugging dogs and cats and things like that, then it can transfer to them pretty easily. And that includes our personal animals at home. So we really want to be conscious of the PPE we're wearing. So treatment for ringworm in a shelter setting usually consists of two main parts. One of those is oral medications. So usually you'll get an oral antifungal medication and you give that on a taper. So usually you start with like a daily dose and then you work it down. Usually you'll do like 1 week on, 1 week off. You might do every other day, you might do every day until they are cleared. These medications are pretty safe. I've only ever had one dog react to it. Reactions are not normal, so they can stay on it for a pretty long time to help flush out that fungus from their skin. The other part of it is bathing and cleaning. So baths are really the bulk of the treatment plan for ringworm. It's kind of changed over the past few years. So when I started in the field, we were using something called lime sulfur dip, which is a very, very highly concentrated, medicated, topical antimicrobial. It smells like rotten eggs. It has the consistency of really, really concentrated urine. It's terrible. Because it's so concentrated, even if we dilute it, you really had to be careful of not letting the animals lick those spots or get it in their eyes or their nose. You had to be cognizant about how much you use just because of the smell and the high intensity of the chemical. And then you had to make sure you weren't letting it sit too long on their skin because it could actually cause more irritation on the lesions where you're putting it. So it was very, very difficult to use this treatment, and it wasn't very sustainable. Didn't really make a lot of sense for a lot of shelters to keep using this. In recent years, a lot of shelters have moved to a different kind of topical antimicrobial shampoo and mousse. So the shampoo is really good because obviously it's formulated as a shampoo, so it's not as intense. So you can actually more easily massage it and lather it into the skin right at the hair follicles. If they get it in their eyes, it's not as bad. Of course you want to make sure you're not, but at the same time it's a little bit safer. If they lick it, they might have a little bit of a reaction, but it's not going to be as detrimental as licking lime sulfur dip. And then the mousse option is really good too. We usually use it for dogs because we could just massage a little bit into the lesion and it doesn't have to be washed off. It's also really helpful for animals who have handling sensitivities and won't allow full baths. But the shampoo is obviously the ideal because not only are you treating the hair follicles and attacking the fungus on the skin, but you're able to, when you wash it off, you are making sure you're washing off all of the extra spores that could be on the ends of the fur. So if you look at your hair, you're massaging all of the lesion and everything where it's living on the skin, but then all of this hair could have spores in it. So making sure you're washing that off so that it's not going to keep traveling around and reinfecting the animal. So the other big part of this is cleaning. So in the shelter, we usually do full ringworm baths twice a week. So the animals have to be wetted down, lathered up, and then they actually have to sit for 10 minutes with the soap on their skin. So then during that time, I am pulling out all of their bedding, all of their dishes, their litter boxes, everything, spraying it down with an antiseptic sanitizer, and usually I let that sit for 10 minutes to completely kill out any spores that are on there. Obviously spores are gonna live more in like the bedding and stuff, but they can still live on like soft or on smooth steel surfaces. So we wanna make sure we kill all of that. I will let the kennel sit for 10 minutes, and then once they are done sitting, we replace everything with new stuff. So new bedding, new bowls, new dishes, new litter box, new litter, new toys, all of that gets replaced, and then they get rinsed off, and then they go back in, and that is how we do baths at our shelter. It's a pretty, I mean, it is time consuming depending on how many patients you have, but it is a good kind of system because everything has to like sit for 10 minutes. So if you're going along, by the time you get to the end, it's time to like start all over again and rinse and dry. So it is a time-consuming process, especially in the shelter. So doing this twice per week ensures that the animals are getting the effective treatment with the shampoo. It also means that we are cutting down the time of them reinfecting themselves. So we're cutting down the time that the spores can just sit and multiply on the bedding and the surfaces to then reinfect the animal and just, you know, draw out the healing process. And this is why treatment takes so long, because dealing with, you're constantly trying to kill the spores and the fungus and stay ahead of them multiplying on different surfaces. And especially with cats, it takes even longer because litter boxes are like the ideal environment for fungus, because they're moist and they're warm and sandy and it's just like perfect for a fungus to live and grow. And then when the cats will go in the litter box, you know, they're like digging it up and kicking up all of the spores, getting it into their hair, and then it's just kind of a cycle. So really staying on top of cleaning every day, but also deep cleaning during bath days is the best way to cut down the treatment time and the healing time. So how can we tell if they're cured? So a lot of times the lesions will go away far sooner than the fungus actually does. The way that we normally test it where I am now is that we actually grow our own cultures in-house. So a lot of shelters will just rely on sending out lab tests to tell them if they are cleared or not. We will grow our own cultures, so we have these little plates with a medium in them, and you pluck the hairs from the lesions or the normal spots where the fungus might just sit and grow. So usually that's going to be the paws, the ears, the tail, and sometimes like the belly. But we're trying to kind of pull from where the lesions were, just because that's where we know there was an active infection. We pull those hairs and put them on the plate, and then they have to grow for a minimum of 2 weeks in the incubator. That is also why it takes a long time, because you have to let it grow that long to know if you have an active infection. If the plate sits for 3 weeks with no growth whatsoever, then we consider them cleared after that happens twice. So a lot of times we will have a negative plate and then a positive plate and then a negative, and it's difficult to know if it is actually an active infection or if it is secondary spores or environmental or anything like that. So we do 2 consecutive negative culture plates so that we know that they are definitely cleared and they're not going to spread it to someone else. So usually in the shelter, treatment takes at minimum 2 months, but normally it's on average closer to 3 or 4. I've had patients stay for 6 months. I think that was the top most that I've had, just because like we had a group of cats come from a situation where like literally every animal in that house had ringworm, so it really had a lot of time to grow and fester and really populate and just get in there and, you know, hunker down in the skin of all these cats. Those guys stayed for a long time, and treatment took a long time to get them cleared. It depends on how quickly you catch it, what the environment you're providing for them is, and how much you keep up with cleaning, and then obviously sticking with the treatment plan. So like I said, ringworm is hugely prevalent in the shelters because it is very easy for stray animals to pick up ringworm from wherever they're roaming around. So at any given time, I would usually have between 10 and 15 ringworm patients in that ward, with some maybe pending testing. I think the most I had at any one point was about 42, and that was with those cats with the very serious ringworm situation. So it is a lot of time to devote, and oftentimes I was like the only ICU tech on staff, so it was just me taking care of 42 ringworm patients on top of everything else, including parvo, distemper, upper respiratory, things like that. So it is a lot. And in this video, I think I have like 20 with all these little kittens that had just come in. I didn't even show the 13 dogs that I also had in a different ward. Ringworm is hugely prevalent, and it takes a lot of time and can kind of overrun a shelter staff if they don't have any help, or if they aren't able to find alternate placement for them, if that is what that shelter wants to do. Ringworm isn't like a death sentence. It's literally just a skin infection and fungus, and the only thing with the treatment is the time. You know, these cats are like playing and happy and jumping around and eating, and you know, you're not really that worried about their welfare when you walk in. Just kind of going through the motions and doing your thing and being vigilant about your treatment process, and then waiting for a negative test. It's not as intense as something like parvo, where you are wondering if they're going to be in distress at any moment. So I mentioned earlier that foster homes are a real gem for ringworm patients, and that is because not only are we relying on multiple departments to like stay vigilant in the treatment plan with their PPE and their cleaning protocols, and we're depending on everyone to show up every day and do those things correctly. The shelter environment is a highly stressful environment. You know, when the animals are experiencing all that stress, the immune system is actually suppressed. And that makes it easier for any illness of any kind to kind of move in and wreak havoc, especially with cats. Cats are hugely susceptible to contracting illnesses just because of stress. A lot of times you'll see that with upper respiratory infections and things like that, but ringworm is no different. So if the immune system is depressed, then any kind of fungus can just get in there and get seated in there and stick it out for as long as possible. Getting these animals out of the shelter environment will actually help decrease their stress, increase their immune system, and make it easier for them to heal in a quicker amount of time. You have the added benefit of having them flourish behaviorally and socially outside of the shelter environment, getting to see how they are in a home and how they are with people and how they are with each other and things like that. So it is really helpful to have these animals in a foster home, especially when treatment is so long. So you will see kind of in my ward that we have there aren't really any windows, there aren't really any things to the outside. They stay in their kennels because we don't want them infecting each other. There's not really a lot of capability to give them a lot of enrichment. We do have a volunteer that comes and sits with them and socializes them, but even that is not, great for kittens who come in at like 6 weeks and leave when they're like 6 months. Stressful time, but it's also a really vital time for that social time that we have to spend just treating them in a very specific way and not really paying that much attention to the social aspect. Having a foster home that can kind of do both is really, really beneficial for these animals. So if you are looking for a medical foster and your local shelter has a ringworm foster program, I highly recommend you seeking them out, asking questions, seeing what's involved. I am going to give you a few tips here, what I would recommend for if you are interested in fostering ringworm, specifically kittens, but also puppies. So obviously, unless you don't have other animals, but generally also for yourself, you're going to want to isolate them. So if you have a spare room, if you have a spare bathroom, anything like that you can just devote to those animals, that would be ideal. And I would set it up normally, but I would also have basically 2 sets of equipment that you're using. So 2 sets of like any kind of bedding, 2 sets of bowls, 2 sets of litter boxes, so that when you clean, you have 1 set that you can just put in, kind of rotate them as you do the cleaning every week or twice a week or whatever. And your foster department should be able to furnish you with all of those things. So if you ask for extra blankets and extra toys, they should be able to do that with no problem. They'll also be able to give you whatever kind of disinfectant they're using. So if they are using something like Excel, they should be able to give you like wipes or a spray bottle, and they should be able to refill it whenever you need, so you can like keep up with the sanitizing. And if you are having like a carpeted area, you can like spray Excel and vacuum over it. You could also use any kind of carpet cleaner with antimicrobial properties and vacuum that through as well. So when those kiddos are out of there, you have a way to sanitize that area and not have it infect anyone else that might go in there afterwards. So the shelter will obviously send you with any kind of medication or shampoo or mousse. So you're gonna need a place to bathe them as well. So depending on the size, if you have a bathroom that you're devoting and you have a tub in there, then you're all set. You could also use a sink, or you can use an extra like big litter box that you fill with water and just kind of do that, just making sure that when you go to rinse them, you have fresh water. Then the disinfectant that they give you will also work as well. So just making sure you're spraying all of those surfaces and letting them sit completely soaked and wet for 10 minutes will kill anything, and it'll be good to use again. So for interacting with the fosters and playtime and things like that, I just recommend having a specific set of clothes that you wear when you go in. So it can be an old pair of pajamas, an old t-shirt and jeans. You could even have like a t-shirt or a jeans and stuff like that, and then wear an apron. You could also ask your shelter if they have any gowns that they could spare. So you could get like a stack of disposable gowns that you just wear when you go in. But if you don't want to go that route, you just want to have some clothes on, you can do that. You just wash them the same way as you would wash the bedding. So bedding gets washed with bleach and soap, and that kills it. So if you are just washing your clothes like regular, and if you just wear those clothes when you go in, put them in the laundry when you come out, and wash them all together with the bleach, you should be fine to wear them again and not be infecting yourself or your animal. Your foster department obviously will also provide you with gloves too. So yeah, no touching with bare hands, no rubbing on our faces, nothing like that, even though I know it's really, really tempting. The other thing I recommend too is if you're fostering a dog or puppies with ringworm, I recommend asking for some kind of X pen or playpen that you can set up in your backyard, so that you have a specific area of your yard where they can go outside and go potty and have outside time. It's kind of portioned off from what your family or your personal animals might need outside. Most shelters are probably going to ask for fosters for multiple kittens or puppies. So usually you could take a couple and they will kind of keep each other entertained. So you might not need to go in there and do too much to give them enrichment, although it is good if you are able to go in and socialize them and get them good with like touch and obviously you're going to get them good with baths and things like that. So just knowing that like a lot of shelters will be looking for someone to take like at least 2 or 3. Is up to you how many you want to take, and if you just want to do adults, there are adults that are there as well that need that attention and treatment time and socialization. Now, I know it is a huge time commitment, because not only are you committing to taking care of these animals daily just like normal with feeding and cleaning and medication, but you're also committing to multiple times a week of bathing, cleaning, the extra, care you have to take with PPE and things like that. So I do understand that it is a huge commitment, but at the same time, it is really, really helpful, because you would be contributing to saving so many lives that would have otherwise been euthanized for something that is highly, highly curable. So my one and only foster did end up having ringworm, and the only way we found out she actually did have ringworm was because I ended up getting it. Multiple tests had shown that she was negative, And then when I got her home and I was cuddling on her and loving on her, I ended up getting like lesions all along my arm. And then when we did our in-house culture test, it came back positive. In that time, it was like really, I only got it because we thought she was negative. So I was like letting her get up all on me. But even when I had it, and even through that, before we knew she had it, I didn't end up passing it to my personal dog, and I didn't end up giving it to anyone else, like my husband or anything like that. That was the 4th time I had ringworm. The other times I had it was from obviously touching kittens before we knew they were positive. And I like never do anything for it. Like I've tried Lotrimin and things like that, but honestly, I just kind of let it be and it goes away on its own. Like you can't even see any of the lesions I had. I did have, like, you could see them for a good few months, but I didn't even, you know, they're gone now. Obviously you can go to your doctor and get medicine and things like that, but at the same time it is going to go away on its own as long as you don't keep reinfecting yourself. So it is a real shame that some shelters are still euthanizing for this. I understand with, you know, we're all having like a staffing crisis at this point, even just that plus the time that it takes. I think it is a good investment because you come out the other side with kittens and puppies that are, you know, highly socialized, used to all kinds of touch, used to baths. Usually they're going to be used to like, you know, touching on their ears and touching on their feet and their bellies and everything, because that's how we have to like pluck hairs and things like that. And then by the time they're done, they are just dying for real snuggles. And it's so great when we actually get to like interact with them or put them in like a playroom with friends and they get to kind of run around and finally be a real cat or a real dog. Having fosters that can kind of bridge that gap, not only in treatment time and healing time, but also in the social time, it just goes a long way to contribute to these animals' like health and happiness. So let me know if you have any questions down below. I'd love to answer anything ringworm related. Thanks for watching and we'll see you next time.